The film opens on March 19, 2003, as Iraqi General Mohammed al-Rawi flees his residence amid the bombardment of Baghdad. Before leaving the compound, he passes a notebook to his aide Sayed, instructing him to warn his officers to reach their safe houses and await his signal. 4 weeks later, U.S. Army Chief Warrant Officer Roy Miller and his platoon are on a mission to inspect a warehouse for Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. Miller briefs his platoon about the location. It's a military storage site, Diwania, and intel suggests possible nerve agents, choking agents, live pathogens, and chemical-tipped missiles. He mentions that the 101st Airborne Division had secured the area earlier that morning. To Miller's surprise, the warehouse is not secure. Looters are entering and exiting freely. Miller calls for Lieutenant Asira, who is responsible for the site. Asira informs him of a sniper in a nearby tower and explains that the 101st Airborne Division is understaffed to establish a perimeter effectively. Miller gathers his men and informs them that the weapons are located in the northwest corner of the complex, with a sniper positioned on the 5th floor of the southeast corner room. Miller devises a plan to draw out the sniper so that his team can eliminate him. After neutralizing the sniper, Miller discovers that the warehouse is empty. Confused and frustrated, he remarks that this is the 3rd consecutive time they've found nothing, despite the intel supposedly coming from the United Nations. Afterward, Miller meets with Colonel Bethel to report that the intel they're relying on is unreliable and leads them nowhere. Bethel warns him not to cause any trouble, emphasizing the pressure to find something substantial for media coverage back in Washington. Bethel dismisses Miller's concerns about inaccurate intelligence, urging him to focus on executing orders. Later, a debriefing is given by Captain Jonathan Vaught, who states that they're continuing to target high-priority sites since all the people back home are anxiously awaiting the information that they found these weapons. He further explains that they have a detailed media plan that involves the top-rated media in the United States and the UK so that they're prepared to cover all aspects of the good news. Miller raises his hand to bring up the point that the majority of the intel given to him is inaccurate and anonymous. High-ranking officials quickly dismiss his concerns, saying that it's solid and good to go. But Miller persists in his argument, mentioning the Diwania site the previous week and how the 101st took casualties securing it for them only to find it was a toilet factory. He says there's a disconnect between what they receive and what they're seeing on the ground, that there is a problem with the intelligence. The officials remind him that his job is to only execute his commands and not to worry about how they're provided. The team's next mission site is at Al Mansour. Afterward, CIA agent Martin Brown approaches Miller and introduces himself, where he asks Miller if he's going to the Al Mansour site in Baghdad. When Miller confirms, Martin tells him he's only going to be wasting his time, as the next place he is to search was already inspected by a UN biological team 2 months before, and that it too has been confirmed empty. Afterward, Martin gives him his card and tells him he's right that this thing doesn't add up and instructs Miller to call him if he finds anything. Meanwhile, U.S. Department of Defense official Clark Poundstone welcomes returning Iraqi exile politician Ahmed Zubaydi at the airport. There, Poundstone is questioned by Wall Street Journal reporter Lori Dane. She says she needs to speak directly to Magellan, but Poundstone brushes her off. While Miller and his team approach their destination, the road gets crowded by angry and desperate Iraqi civilians. Miller orders some of his men to get out of the track and clear out the traffic, but as they're getting too exposed to the enemy, he orders his team to get back and they keep moving without stopping. Poundstone is under orders to install Ahmed Zubaydi as the head of the Iraqi government, and he states that they are convening an Iraqi Freedom Convention inside the Green Zone the following day. They are expecting to have representatives from all 3 main ethnic groups, the Kurds, the Shia, and the Sunni, angling for different levels of power. On the contrary, CIA agent Brown says that Zubaydi hasn't been in Iraq for 30 years and believes that his returning from exile has no standing there. Poundstone states that he's the best they have right now for a stable democracy, as he's been a help to them, and their office is extremely satisfied with all the information they've gotten from him. Martin believes that Zubaydi's been selling them fake information for years and says he's unreliable. When Poundstone argues that Martin is questioning every single piece of evidence that's coming in up to the point where they can't make any progress, Martin responds by saying they cannot just hand the country over to an exile no one has ever heard of, and so they need to have the Iraqi army play a role in stabilizing the country. Meanwhile, an Iraqi civilian who calls himself Freddy sees a bunch of Iraq high officials entering a house. He quickly gets in his car and leaves. The people in the house include General al-Rawi and his officers and aides in Baghdad, who are discussing the current situation. Among the aides is Sayed, who is the host of the meeting, where he states that the information they have is that Saddam has fled, the Americans will occupy the entire country, and they will face hard choices while their men wait for orders. He concludes by saying that what they decide now will determine the future of Iraq. While checking yet another unpromising site, Miller hears some disturbing sounds. When he goes over to find out what it is, a man is pinned down to the ground by Sergeant Wilkins, who tells Miller that the man is out of control. The man turns out to be Freddy, and Wilkins says he wants to talk to Miller about something important. Freddy calms down after he's let go and tells Miller that he saw some Ba'ath Party VIPs meeting in a nearby home. When Miller asks why he should believe him, Freddy simply answers saying that he's just here to help, so he takes Freddy with him and orders his men to take Freddy's car and get one other. If they roll over there in those Humvees, the Ba'athists are going to see them coming. Miller gathers his men and briefs them of the plan. In the first car, he wants to take the Iraqi guy, Freddy, with him riding shotgun and one of the soldiers in the back covering Freddy the entire time. The rest of the men are going to roll in the pickup truck behind them. Concurrently, a heated argument ensues during the discussion between the Ba'athists, and Al-Rawi steps in to end the argument. Al-Rawi says the streets are full of anarchy, violence in Iraq increases, and while the Americans try to manufacture democracy, eventually they will realize they need it. So, he decides to wait for the Americans to offer him a deal in the future of Iraq and fight if they don't. As the meeting ends, Miller and his men arrive at the location and see some people leave the house holding firearms. When they get into a car, Miller quickly orders his team to seize the car with the 3 men inside it, and then the house. Upon realizing the situation, Al-Rawi and his men immediately make their way to escape. As the team bursts into the house, a brief gunfight ensues. Al-Rawi narrowly escapes, but Sayed is captured. Miller brings Freddy to be his translator and asks Sayed questions like what the meeting was about, but the man refuses to speak. Miller confiscates Al-Rawi's notebook, and they take Sayed back to camp to ask him if he knows about the WMDs and where they are. Sayed says only Al-Rawi knows about these things. Miller asks him how he can find Al-Rawi, but Sayed will only reveal his location if Miller can protect his family, and so Miller agrees. Before Miller can extract much information, Sayed is taken away by special operations personnel. However, Miller keeps Al-Rawi's notebook. While being taken away, Sayed mentions his notebook being confiscated by Miller, and so the special operations leader confronts him if he has it. As Miller denies the claim, the two forces get into a fight where Miller subtly hands the book to Freddy to hide it. After confirming Miller doesn't have the notebook, the special operation forces leave. Afterward, Miller and his men realize Freddy is gone with the notebook. They immediately spread out, and eventually, Miller catches up to Freddy while having a hard time trying to climb over a wall because of his prosthetic leg. Freddy claims he was going to come back to give it to him after the fight earlier was over. Meanwhile, Dane complains to Poundstone again, but he states that the stakes are much larger than her role in selling newspapers. Dane implies that her paper published stories of WMD based on Poundstone's intel and now needs access to Magellan, the source behind all this intel. Miller goes to Martin's hotel room in the Green Zone, where he tells him what happened and gives him the notebook. Martin arranges for Miller to get into the prison where Sayed is being interrogated. Miller is then approached by Dane, who questions him about the false reports of WMDs. Miller bluffs his way in to see Sayed. Near death after being tortured, he tells Miller that they did everything you asked us to in the meeting. When Miller asks what meeting he is talking about, he says one word: Jordan. Miller then confronts Dane about the bogus intel she published, but she refuses to identify Magellan, her source. After Miller tells her he suspects that Al-Rawi is Magellan, Dane reluctantly confirms that Magellan met with a high-ranking official in February in Jordan. Miller realizes that Poundstone's men are hunting Al-Rawi and can think of only one reason. Al-Rawi confirmed there was no Iraqi WMD program and is now a major liability. Poundstone confiscates the notebook from Martin. It contains the locations of Al-Rawi's safe houses. When Miller tries to arrange a meeting with Al-Rawi, he is abducted by Al-Rawi's men following Poundstone's announcement of the decision to disband the entire Iraqi army. After a long search, Miller finally comes face to face with Al-Rawi, who is revealed to be Magellan. The general tells Miller that contrary to the information Poundstone disseminated, Al-Rawi told U.S. officials that there were no WMDs in Iraq and that the country had ended production of them in the early 90s. Miller tells Al-Rawi that he wants to bring him in to tell his version of events. Al-Rawi asks Miller, "Did anyone verify Poundstone's story?" The question is rhetorical and meant to imply that if anyone in the government had been interested in getting the facts straight, it would have been easy for them to do so. Instead, as Al-Rawi states, "Your government wanted to hear the lie, Mr. Miller. They wanted Saddam out, and they did exactly what they had to do." Shortly before their meeting, the U.S. government disbanded the Iraqi army, putting the general in a precarious position. Al-Rawi explains that when he came forward with his information, he was told he'd have a place in the new Iraq. However, he now realizes that he was used as a pawn for Poundstone and his associates and will be disposed of the first chance they get get. Poundstone's men attack the locations listed in the notebook. When they get to the general's hiding place, he flees, ordering one man to kill Miller. Miller manages to kill his captor and races after al-Rawi. Miller finally captures al-Rawi, but Freddy suddenly appears and shoots the general, stating that the fate of Iraq is not his to decide. Freddy believed that al-Rawi was a tyrant and a traitor to the Iraqi population. With his only witness against Poundstone now dead, Miller tells Freddy to flee. Later, Miller writes a scathing report. He confronts Poundstone in a meeting and gives him the report, but Poundstone dismisses it, telling Miller that WMDs do not matter. Poundstone then rejoins the meeting, only to see Iraqi factional leaders reject Zubaydi, the US's choice as leader of Iraq, as an American puppet and storm out. Afterward, Dane receives Miller's report by email. The recipient list includes reporters from major news agencies around the world. Ultimately, the ending is a bittersweet one. Miller can expose Poundstone's lies, but they have already done immense damage to the people of Iraq. Although the film fictionalizes many characters and events to tell its story, it does accurately depict how the specter of Iraqi WMDs was used as a pretense for invasion, and the fact that no evidence of those WMDs was found. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.